and welcome back to another episode of the Whole Brother Mission podcast. Today, we are talking about autism in light of Autism Awareness Month. I was reminded of this because we try to keep track of all the different months and national this day and national that day and national this month, but we can't forget Autism Awareness Month, which is April, and I believe Autism Awareness Day is April 2nd. So we wanted to take some time to have this conversation. And looking back, I do see oftentimes the faces and advocates as it relates to autism are white women more often than not. But obviously, autism affects everyone, and we have a focus on Black men. And I couldn't think of a better person to speak to than an artist and friend I connected with a couple years ago for a conversation on culture years ago. But he's an artist, and you'll learn more about his music and his newest project, his book. He saw that it was good, but he also is a father. And I'll allow him to bring you in on his connection to autism. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Sho Baraka. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me. It's just crazy, Malik. I don't really do a whole lot of conversations and interviews directly about autism. I'm often asked about fatherhood and things like that, but autism directly. But it's interesting, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. Although I'm not an expert, but I'm glad to be with you.
Yeah, definitely. And we don't, I'm not pushing you to speak on it as a mental health professional, but more so as a dad, just
Yeah.
navigating through. So, for those that don't know, could you bring us in on this story? When did autism become a part of your life?
Well, man. First of all, thank you for having me. Oftentimes when I think about life, I think about how God may prepare you for things that you may not have the foresight to see, or you may not even know may come your way, or whatever obstacles or situations that may come your way in the future. And for me, my journey with autism started actually before I had children. I worked in college. I worked at a you know what was known as a mental health and mental retardation center, which is they've changed the name. It's mental retardation is no longer, I guess you could say, acceptable
Yeah.
as the nomenclature for, but it was a residence for adults, and most of those adults had severe, I guess you can say, behavioral, I guess, their variants of how they managed themselves, and when it came to like anger, et cetera, et cetera. Lived on these residents, and I worked with them. And one of the things I realized is that a lot of those individuals were on the spectrum, and I didn't really um, know how to decipher, I guess you can say, retardation as they claimed it was versus, autism. I just said I just worked there. I tried to have compassion, but I also didn't have enough compassion to actually learn and study. And so once I was done working there, I just kind of moved on with life. And then a few years later, got married, and I had a daughter. My daughter was neurotypical. And then a year and a half later, we had another son. I mean, we had another child, and it was my son, Zakai. And we have a similar story that most families have, as autism and the spectrum has this way of, I guess, revealing itself somewhere around 18 months. And then between there and 3 years old, families tend to get some sort of diagnosis around three. But he was not talking, but he was using words. Like one word phrases. He would respond to his name. He would look you in the face. But then all of a sudden, around 18 months, he there was these small little idiosyncrasies and these behaviors that he started to exhibit. And slowly but surely, one of the things, like, I would see him walk on his toes, and I was like, that's a little strange. He's never done that before. And then he would start to, he wouldn't respond to his name as often. And then he wouldn't look you in the eye anymore. And it just there were these behaviors and these characteristics that were just concerning me. But then I started to realize, I was like, man, I used to see this at the facility I worked at the homes that I worked in. And that's when I realized, I was like, you know what, this may be bigger than just regression, if you will, or just being a typical kid who's ignoring the calls of their parents. I was like, this may be something that should be concerning. And I hate to, paint the black people as a monolith, but there's a lot of black, parents out there. When you talk to your, matriarchs and the patriarchs about your kids, they be like, "Oh, don't worry, ain't nothing wrong with that boy." You know what I'm saying? Your cousin Junebug didn't start talking till he was 7. You know what I'm saying? And so, and you get these, and after a while, you're like, you know what? They're right. Junebug, he a smart brother now, but he probably didn't start talking until he was around 7. Well, anyway, when 3 hit, we realized, no, this is not cousin Junebug. This is not just somebody with a speech impediment. This seems to be a little more serious. And so we were really afraid. We ended up meeting a family who went through a similar situation, but like 4 years earlier than us. And they really encouraged us to get a diagnosis. They sent us to a particular doctor here in Atlanta. We did it. And I think by that time we were at peace with whatever the decision was, because we knew that our son needed attention and we wanted to do it sooner than later. And so when he was around 3 years old, we, got pretty much a confirmation through a series of assessments that he was on the autism spectrum. And that's, that forever changed our lives. And we began to realize, like, our life is not going to be what we thought it would be. We had this neurotypical daughter who, exhibited all the behaviors and actions and that, most parents expect in their children. And then you have this other child who is different. And you're trying to figure out, how do I balance this? I obviously don't love them differently, but I also have to parent differently now. Like, I can't parent the same way. And that's obvious with any children, but there's a drastic switch and pivot when you realize, like, my son may not live on his own, or he may not play a particular a sport in high school, or he may not go to prom, or he may not be able to live independently in the way that we did, or our daughter will most likely be able to do. So we started to prep ourselves for a different life. And I'll just stop there because I know you probably got a lot of different questions. But I think that was when, because between 18 months and 3, it was really tough. My wife was blaming herself, and I was blaming myself for letting my wife blame herself. And I think there's great tension that happens in marriages, and we can talk about this more later, but there are great tensions that happen in marriages where there is some sort of, I guess you could say, neurology disorder, or some sort of special need in the household, because it wears on you as a couple, and you have to begin to determine, what do we value most about our relationship, and how are we going to survive and serve one another in order to make this marriage stick, not just for ourselves, because yes, we need to love ourselves in order to be successful, in order to thrive, but we also want to be successful and live a long time for our kids. So I'll stop there.
No,
because I can talk
you're
forever.
good. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot there. I thank you for sharing what you have shared. So I want to catch the audience up on a few things. So I'm in the know to a certain extent, but the average person might not be. So first, you use the term neurotypical to describe your daughter. Help the
Mhm.
audience understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I mean, autism in itself, and once again, I'm not an expert, but is a is a serious development disorder. So it impairs interaction, cognitive uh, engagement, and oftentimes, and this is why it's autism spectrum. So there are some people who interact better, who communicate better. They use full sentences. They know how to communicate. They can actually function in society independently. And there are some people who can't do any of those things. They can't communicate. They use speaking devices. Um, some of them need even, like, different assistances when it comes to how they communicate. And so usually when people talk about autism, they talk about autism in the spectrum, but when you talk about people who are, who don't have autism, you say neurotypical, folks who normally say normal children.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that you communicate somebody who's normal without, I guess you could say, creating triggers, or
Stigmatizing the
yeah,
other. Yeah.
stigmatize, yeah, is by saying neurotypical. So uh, I've learned how to change my language, even as a parent, because there's times when I say things about my kids that I'm like, "Ah, I don't want that label on them. I don't want them to feel, or other families to feel, that this is how I view them." Like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the whole Junebug situation, and I definitely understand that. We at the Whole Brother Mission deal with the stigma of mental health in the Black community quite a bit,
Hmm.
and there is a level of I think naivete or naiveness, whichever works,
Yeah.
as it relates to when we see certain things. A lot of times they are kind of downplayed, like that's just how they are. They always been different. Some in church may say touched. We have all these different
Right, right, right.
things that we do that tap around people that may be interacting in a different way,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
we
yeah.
haven't historically leaned into assessments and diagnosis within reason.
Right.
We have seen there be an actual stigma as it relates to that. So I get the hesitation, but I did want to speak to the idea of wrestling with this as a father, because even in dealing with clients who may have a child or son, specifically a father who may have a son who is depressed or bipolar or any other type of label that is typically seen as a negative or a detractor, what is seen quite a bit is kind of a process or spectrum of acceptance.
Hmm.
And eventually we get there, but it's a bumpy road getting there. It
Yeah,
typically starts with a level of avoidance or denial. So for
yeah.
you, as you were observing what you observed, and then you got to the point of actually seeking out a professional for a diagnosis, did you have to wrestle through that at all?
Absolutely. I think one of the things, I think a lot of people who may seek counseling now, people who recognize that they need professional help, they get there because they're humble. And that diagnosis was a humbling process for me, because when I got married, I married a beautiful woman, and I assumed that we would have this storybook life, and we would have these neurotypical children, and everything would be great. Um, but then when you don't have those things, if I can get religious, it humbles you, and you realize that as great as I think I am, I have to trust in the Lord. I have to begin to realize that I cannot operate and exist within my own strength. And I was very humbled, and and in that process, it made me believe in things that I probably didn't once believe. And there are other, I guess you can say, factors and variables on why it tends to be that the families of June bugs are like, hey, you know what, that boy gonna be all right, because historically Black people have been, demoralized.
Overcomers.
What you say?
Oh, I said overcomers. I thought you were going to say how we just get through any and everything somehow,
Yeah,
some
yeah,
way.
yeah. And so in a sense, that's, yeah, absolutely. But I was going to say how, the medical field has, experimented on us.
Yeah.
it hasn't been the best for Black people.
Right.
Um, and so therefore there's a lot of doubt. And then the stigma of weakness runs rampant within not just male culture, but especially Black male culture. And so these things are signifiers of weakness. And to your point, which I think is great, we are kind of like overcomers, and we think we can just pray everything away. And I do wish I had the faith to believe that I could just hit my knees and pray, but the Lord gives me wisdom when I get up from that prayer to seek help, because He's gifted people and with resources and the skill of hand to help us thrive and persevere through these tough issues and tough times. Now, for me and my family, yeah, like it hit us like a it is like a truck. So I realized, like, if I want my kids to succeed, if I want this family to succeed, I'm going to have to reach outside of my own capacity in order to find a way to to create not solutions, but to create great opportunities of flourishing, not just for my family, but for my kids, because I don't know anything about autism. And so to walk around thinking that we'll just solve it through osmosis and just by default is very callous. And to hit you with something else, uh, we had the two children, and my wife and I were pretty confident that we weren't going to have any more children. And 5 years later, long story short, we decided to have one more child, and we had our second boy, and he ended up having autism as well. And so now we're in a place where we're like, one, like, damn, Lord, like, what's
Mm-hmm.
up? Like, what do we do? But then it's also in a place like, this may sound ridiculous, but you know, we're in this position, and he doesn't put more on you than you can bear. And so it's like, well, he knows the love that I have for my son. He knows the love that I have for my daughter. And if there's anybody who's going to have these children and try to make the best of the situation that they live in and love these kids, I think my wife and I are those people. And so I didn't see it as a punishment. I saw it as an opportunity to grow, to love, and to be a service not only to these children, but to be a service to the world, because I became someone who was an accidental advocate in a way, and that accidental advocacy turned into very intentional advocacy.
Right. Yeah, and I get the idea of, like you said, damn Lord, completely understand
Right.
that. I don't have children of my own, but in several aspects of life where the hits just keep coming, and it's
Right.
like, yo, what's going on here? So I can relate in that regard, but I also understand it has its nuances too. I'm curious, uh, how has your and you said this, that you have three children, one daughter, two
Yeah.
sons, and both sons have been diagnosed with autism. What are their ages currently?
My oldest daughter is 16. My oldest son is 14, about to be 15, and then my youngest son is 8.
Okay. So you're navigating through parenting now with this in mind, and you mentioned earlier that it has to do with development. And for those that don't know, I think you did mention this: autism is on a spectrum. So there are more, I guess, severe cases, and there are less severe cases.
Hmm.
The more severe cases may put you in a position where that person may need assistance with day-to-day life,
Yeah.
whereas less severe cases, a person may be able to live on their own. So
Right.
I know that takes time to understand the severity of the case as the person's developing uh, into adulthood. Where are you at in that process and navigating through your involvement and your son's lives moving forward?
Yeah, I think, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I think we're at a place where we recognize that our lives are not going to be the lives um, that fit this narrative of meet, happy marriage, have children, send children off to college, they become adults, they get married, have grandkids, and you're empty nesters, and you just go vacation with your three kids and their children and your grandparents, and you just live happily ever after. It's a different narrative that we're accepting, and in that narrative, it takes a lot of dying to yourself. It takes a lot of understanding that there's a potential that my kids may live on their own independently. I hate to say I doubt it, because I don't want to be somebody who lacks faith, but I'm also, I don't know, I'm optimistic that there may be opportunities. But then there's this other part of me that's like, I don't even know if I would want them necessarily to live independently, because I think community is a very healthy thing, and they bring so much joy to my wife and I and our family. My grandmother, who is 95 today, actually, um, loves my son. Like, he is her favorite. And so these individuals bring about so much joy. I learn so much from them. It's every day, when there's, every week or month when there's small victories, it just does something for my heart. Uh, and so I and my wife have reconciled with the reality that they may live with us for the rest of our lives, and the hope is that if we pass away before they do, is there someone who will take care of them? So I'm trying to make all the money possible, nice insurance plans, so when we pass away, that they'll be taken care of and loved on by family members and friends. And so, yeah, man, we we're fortunate in the sense that our kids do exhibit a lot of independence. As they're getting older, our youngest son actually probably has more independence, has more cognitive awareness, maybe than. And here's interesting: my youngest son has probably more social engagement, cognitive awareness than my older son, but my older son has better speech and language communication than my younger son. And so there's these interesting dynamics that come into play. But for the most part, like my oldest son, if he had a credit card, he would buy everything on Amazon. So he knows how to operate the internet. He knows how to, cook to some degree. And my young son is just he's he's like a professional house. Like, he makes sure the house is clean. He cleans behind. He's just a wonder. He's a wonderful kid in the sense that he's clean. He loves to like help his brother out, even though he's older than him, with making sure his backpack is packed. So it's a beautiful thing, but they're just different, and we've come to accept that. I've also come to uh, this space where not be because I used to be ashamed to take them out in public. I used to be ashamed to even get them haircuts, to take them in a store, and now one of the things I love doing, I don't do it as often as probably people want me to, but I showcase their life on my social media at times, mostly my stories, because I just want people to see what it looks like for a father, especially a Black father, to engage with his autistic kids, with his kids who have autism. So, yeah, man, and if in a lot of ways normalize their lives, you know what I mean? And so I partner with a lot of organizations that are trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. So I'd like you to speak to this from more of a husband perspective now,
Yeah.
because I know that there are a lot of guys listening that may be Christian or aren't Christian, but in a general sense have this idea of when I get married one day, it's just going to be intimacy nonstop. And just this, they have this a
Right.
romanticized view that doesn't typically take into account the difficulties that come with marriage that may even hinder the intimacy.
Yeah.
So
Oh, absolutely.
obviously, when facing a difficult situation like navigating through a diagnosis, like with your children, you even mentioned earlier that it affected your relationship with your wife. So
Mm.
yes, there is that aspect of marriage, but could you provide some balance for those that may not realize the difficulties, including this, that may come with partnering with someone?
Yeah, man. I think all mature relationships have to understand that the relationship you're in with a person is going to change. It evolves, and maturity teaches you how to evolve with that person or in the circumstance. Most marriages and relationships fall apart because, um, people who loved one another enter into a new season, and they don't know how to evolve or change with the season. And my wife and I had a wonderful marriage going into her second pregnancy. It was great after, for all intents, it was great. I mean, you know, there we were young, trying to figure out careers around that time, and there's the normal obstacles that you face as a young man and a young woman. But then when you have a son who's on the autism spectrum, that changes so much, because now you realize, like, my wife is the type of woman who, and she wouldn't be upset with me sharing this. Um, she worries a lot, and when there's things that she can't control, I think that sends her to a place of discomfort. I won't say depression, but it sends her to a place that is not healthy. And if you know relationships, when your spouse or the person you love is in a dark place, then that affects you. And of course, it's hard to have very intimate moments with your wife when their mind, or the individual's, the spouse's mind, is elsewhere. And so there were these moments where I realized I'm not excited. I'm not going to even lie to you. It's like, man, I want to have sex right now. Like, but I also realized that my wife is stressing out about her son. And so, um, I'm like, we can stress out together while we have sex, but it's all good. If that's not what you want to do, then I'll figure out how to show some compassion in this moment.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but the reality is that you have to learn how to die to yourself every day. I mean, and love this person sacrificially in a way that is going to help them, not just so that you can get your the benefits that you want at the other end, but it helps them become a better, more whole person, as in to kind of give a shout out to the podcast. And so for us, there were a couple of things that we needed to do. One, we started going to a lot of conferences. We started to do a lot of married groups. We started to make sure we would friend people who were in the same journey with us, and having those people around us, attending those events, reading that literature. Like, it's literally, I think it saved us in a lot of way, because we would have conversations with these couples and they'd be like, that's normal, baby. Don't worry. That's, you guys ain't crazy. Yeah, sometimes you want to choke the child, and don't choke the child because you don't want to go to jail. But say love the child. Our oldest son, used to have these moments where he would literally flip out, and he would just throw himself against walls. He would bang his head up against walls. And I'm sitting there concerned. I'm like, man, the police gonna come, because he gonna go to school with this big knot on his head. They're gonna think I'm knocking him upside his head. And I just don't know what to do. Got connected with an organization, Culture City. We told them, like, hey, man, this is what's happening with our child. We don't know what to do. They said, hey, we got a therapist and a behavior therapist who is one of the most forward leading individuals in this field. We're going to set you up with some time with her. She gave us tips and resources on how to de-escalate our son. He also would never sleep in his own bed. He would always sleep in the bed with us. That, obviously changes the intimacy in a relationship. And so she helped us, like, because we were like, well, look, we need help. She helped us get to a place where not only he would eventually sleep in his bed and stay in his bed, but also when we knew he was throwing fits, it's usually a communication issue. He doesn't know how to communicate on the level like we do about our frustrations. And so he's just upset. And so we learned how to communicate more clearly with him, talk him down. And then if we had to, restrain him in a way that wouldn't cause more physical harm to him or anybody else. And man, the Lord changed this young boy literally, like, overnight. Like, one day he went from this child who was, I was afraid, would times try to open, like, grab the steering wheel, just do interesting things, to a kid who just doesn't stop smiling now. Like, he is the most joyful little boy I know. And I'm just, or teenager. He ain't a little boy no more. He almost as tall as me, Joker. But it's just amazing, like, to see the growth. And that doesn't happen unless you try to figure out how to get help. You know what I mean? And I think help leads to health. You know what I mean? And so for me, we were like, in order for us to have sanity, in order for me to feel like I want to even stick in and stay in this house and stay in this relationship, we got to figure out how to reach outside our own resources, our own capacity, to figure out how we can get some help. And the conferences, the organizations, the families, and the medical profession really helped us out. The last thing I'll say is, we have friends who were, I guess you can say, they would hunt and scour the web and city for resources that weren't ever present in our face. And oftentimes there are so many resources out there, but you just got to seek them out. You got to find them. Different camps, different just services, that whether it be local or private or public services, that will help your kids, and that's how we found actually the school that our kids attend right now. And they've been there our oldest son has been there for about 7 years, maybe close to 7 years now. So, and it's a school that specializes in teaching kids who are on the spectrum, and kids with other special needs.
I'm Olivia Morgan, Intake Coordinator here at the Whole Brother Mission. I'm here to pass on a little information about how you can join us in helping men in need seek licensed professional counselors nationwide. Number 1, ask. Ask if your employer participates in matching donations. Many employers will match your gift to a nonprofit. We are a 501c3, so all gifts are tax deductible. Number 2, pass. Pass this video as well as our website on to others so that they are aware of our services and our need of support. And number 3, give. If you're able to, please consider giving. The proceeds remove barriers for men seeing a culturally competent mental health professional, and they support our upcoming HBCU book tour. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. So I understand that you're once again speaking about this not as, hey, I'm a professional, but more so I'm a father and a husband
Yeah.
that's just navigating through it. And here's what I've learned along the way. So there may be people listening who, well, I know oftentimes there are people who are wondering
Yeah.
about uh, if there may be a diagnosis that has been undiagnosed as it relates to a family member, whether it be a child, a sibling, or a friend. And oftentimes it's so hard for people to have that conversation, even though they're
Mm.
observing things. Um,
Yeah.
so, uh, just from your experience, what have you found to be helpful? What would you pass on to people who are wondering in a variety of relationship dynamics? How do you open up a conversation where you have observed some things that are concerning? How do you open up that conversation about potentially seeing a professional for an
Yeah.
assessment?
It's a very difficult conversation because it's a very private and intimate thing. Um, Anytime you're invading someone's private life, and giving them, nobody. First of all, your kids are throwing a fit at a barbecue, at a picnic. Don't nobody want to hear your opinion on how I should rear my children. Even though, once again, here's a harsh generalization. Even though black parents or black adults are notorious for that, especially the baby boomer generation. Like, babe, I'll never forget walking through I think it was a Kroger, and my son was throwing a fit. And this was back when before he kind of had his shift. He was throwing a fit because I wouldn't purchase him something. And this black woman, well, older black woman, just walked up to me. Oh, don't worry, baby. Let me spend a couple days with him. I'll get him right. And I'm sitting there looking at her.
Mm,
I'm looking at her like, ma'am, you have no clue. You have no clue what you're talking about. And I didn't even say anything to her. And the only reason why I didn't cuss her out is because having the respect for my matriarch. You know what I'm saying? uh, so I just looked at her and I just kind of, grabbed my son and we made our way outside. The reality is that we do need those conversations, but it's how you have those conversations. I'll tell you another story. Around the same time, my son, I'm taking him to the barbershop, and I knew during this time, I got about a good hour window before my son is throwing a fit. And so I would strategically call the barber and I would say, hey, bro, I'm on my way. When I get in when I get in the shop, he needs to be in that chair and we need to be ready to go with an hour. He's like, oh no, I got you. I got you. We get there. We are about to be next in line. And all of a sudden this pretty girl walks in and she needs some like eyebrows done or something. And he's trying to get this attention of this young lady or